Welcome to the top 5 mistakes dentists make when pursuing a DSO affiliation. I'm thrilled to be interviewing Brandon Moncrief, an awesome key resource and sponsor of McLaren and Associates. This is an opportunity for you to learn what is going on in the DSO space. This is for all members of our Dental Nachos community. If you would like a complimentary consultation on selling your dental practice, the second biggest decision you make in your career, right after buying a dental practice or starting one, just text SELL to 215-543-6454 to get a complimentary call with our transitions team. I would like to welcome Brandon to our Nacho TV stage. Welcome, Brandon. We so appreciate you joining us for the top 5 mistakes dentists make when pursuing a DSO affiliation. I know everyone wants to see us big, so I'll stop sharing screen right now. But Brandon, before we jump into the webinar, just tell us, what do you do in your daily dental life to help dentists dreams come true, and most importantly, avoid nightmares?
Yeah, good to see you, Paul. Thanks for having me on. I mean, first and foremost, I think our job is to educate and empower dentists to make good decisions with their practice. So every day, day in, day out, I'm talking to large practice owners who are looking at options. You know, they're being solicited by DSOs on a daily basis. Hey, please sell us your practice. Don't call a broker. Don't get representation. Just do a deal in the dark. So every day I'm talking about options, talking about EBITDA, talking about what the DSO landscape looks like, and making sure that doctors understand what their practice is worth, create optionality if they're going to go down that road, and make sure they make good decisions and maximize their outcome if, and that's a big if, they decide to sell their practice to a DSO.
I love that. So it's really about getting education at the right time. I can teach you how to talk dentist to dentist to help you. We talk about treatment plans all the time and how we create the opportunity for patients to chew and smile with confidence. We do full mouth rehabs, the biggest of the big cases. And this is really the biggest of the big decisions. Lindsay, if you see any out there, grab me one of my EBITDA t-shirts. I want to show Brandon that I made last week. So I want to get into a little bit of these top 5 mistakes, but it's confusing, this world, as to what role do people play. I want to point out, Brandon, that my dream was to play professional basketball. That dream failed miserably. You grow to this size, you got to get new dreams, different dreams. But I talk about a transitions basketball team, from attorneys to accountants to brokers. Just talk a little bit about your role in this process.
Yeah, our role in the process is really, we're the quarterback from start to finish. First, let's talk about what's your why, right? Why are you looking to potentially, affiliate with a DSO or bring on a private equity partner? What are you trying to accomplish? Is it you want to offload some administrative burden? You want a better quality of life? Is it economic? Is it a combination of those reasons? Define the why first, and then talk about economics. What's your EBITDA? What would your practice trade for in the open market? What do multiples look like today? What are the unique characteristics of your practice that are going to influence, that multiple and that valuation? And then if the why makes sense, if we're aligned from an economic standpoint, take the practice to market in a bid process, create a highly competitive environment, bring all the different options to the doctor and help them vet, which is the right DSO for them based on their why, and help them maximize their outcome through leveraging that optionality and competition by creating multiple offers. So that's really the role we play. We're with the doctor from start to finish during this process, and there's other advisors that you need on that team to play an appropriate role, and that being your accountant. How do you want to allocate the purchase price? What are the tax implications going to look like? You're going to need a really strong, experienced dental attorney that is very affluent in DSO transactions to represent you from a contract review and negotiation standpoint. You're going to need your financial advisor, involved in this conversation. Can you afford to sell your practice? What is your income going to look like pre-affiliation compared to post-affiliation, and where are you going to invest, that lump sum that you're going to receive at closing? There's a lot of other people that are obviously involved in the decision-making process. A big one is certainly your spouse.
Right.
We typically want the spouse involved in the conversation as well. And then any other, key decision makers in your life, key advisors that should play a role. And then obviously, involving your associates, involving your staff at the appropriate time, typically not at the start of the process, but certainly, before closing, to make sure that they're all on board and we get everybody swimming the same direction.
I love that. I have given a lecture for years of who's been on your team, and Dennis asked how much is it going to cost, and I put a line for your number one confidant, $500 to take them out to the nicest dinner after this is over for them having to listen to you. And usually that is the spouse. I did make one of these shirts, Brandon. We'll get it to you because Mark Costas was in. This is biceps and EBITDA. I brought my 20-pound weight here. You guys can get a picture of me. So I'm just going to work on both of them during your presentation here. So let's start with the mistakes. Dentists always want to avoid mistakes. It's attention getting. So number one mistake dentists make: responding to an unsolicited offer, failure to create optionality and competition. Tell us about that mistake.
Yeah, I mean, DSOs have built marketing machines. They send out a tremendous amount of direct mail, email blasts. They have a business development team of people that knock on doors, trying to convince you to sell your practice to them without looking around, without, understanding what your EBITDA is, what your practice is worth on the open market. They're incentivizing the doctors that they're partnered with. They're paying referral fees for doctors to, introduce their colleagues to that particular DSO in hopes that they can do a deal in the dark. They prefer that you don't have representation. They prefer that you respond to an unsolicited offer, that you get a letter in the mail. Maybe you had a bad day. Maybe
this happened to me. I want to interject. I was in my office manager's little room putting out some team member fire, and the front desk goes, "There's a phone call for you." They didn't screen it at all. I pick it up. They're like, it's like, "Hi, I'm with XYZ DSO. Do you want to sell your practice?" I'm like, "Today, maybe I do want to sell my practice." So while I didn't move forward with that, and I knew enough not to respond, that I totally can see on a bad dental day when things are going cry anxiety, as I put them, that it can be tempting to say, how can I push some of this stress off my plate? And I think we should normalize that for dentists. Unless you're a dentist, knowing how to do the dentistry in the operatory, referee the fights outside the operatory, pay the bills, figure things out, be a therapist, I think it's important. And I'm sure you're going to talk about it over this webinar about some of the stresses dentists deal with and why it is attractive to partner with a DSO when the deal's right. But number one, don't respond to unsolicited offers and create options for buying your practice. That is what will give you the best outcome for you. And I'll ask you some questions off the top of my head, Brandon. The best outcome may not be always the most amount of money. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's absolutely accurate. That comes back to defining that why, right? What are you looking to accomplish? I mean, the money matters to everybody. The economics matter to everybody. But for a lot of people, the key primary motivating factor is not necessarily money. It's often work-life balance, getting that administrative burden off your back. But if that is your why, if that's the primary motivating factor, you need to make sure that you affiliate with a DSO that actually has the infrastructure and the operational fortitude to accomplish that why. You don't want to partner with a DSO that has no infrastructure, doesn't have a corporate headquarters, that can't support you on the day-to-day from an operational perspective if you're looking to offload that administrative burden. So yeah, I mean, defining the why is key, and creating optionality so that you understand, if you met one DSO, you've met one DSO. There's a lot of different deal structures out there. They all have a varying degree of administrative support. They all have a different operational pedigree, culture, financial backer. They're all at a different stage in their recap cycle. They all have different financial goals. I mean, at the end of the day, if they're private equity backed, they all have a similar goal to reach a liquidity event, to reach a recap event, but they come in all different shapes and sizes. The key point in creating optionality is also to create leverage, right? If you're only talking to one buyer, you have no leverage. You have no leverage to negotiate a valuation. You have no leverage to negotiate the legal agreements. And there's a lot of nuances involved in those. And, many of those nuances are negotiable. But if there's only one buyer at the table, you're not creating leverage, you're going to leave money on the table, and you're certainly going to leave optionality on the table. And that goes into the next one. You may end up selling to the wrong DSO.
Number two, I mean, I always think they don't sponsor me, Brand, but I want them to. I would drink a lot of these ahas. So number one aha moment, do not respond to unsolicited offers, create options, because you don't want to sell to the wrong DSO, number two. So this is, dentists will lean forward. People will be listening to this in their cars, working on their biceps and EBITDA, and they will stop. I don't want to sell to the wrong DSO. Tell us what that means.
Yeah, I would say we don't have this issue with our clients because of how we manage the process. But the number one regret that we hear typically from doctors that have sold to a DSO is they either sold prematurely, right? They sold before they were really emotionally or financially ready, or they sold to the wrong DSO. They didn't pick the right partner. And again, comes back to that why. Oftentimes when they've sold to the wrong DSO, it's because they either wanted administrative help, they wanted to offload that managerial burden, but they affiliated with a DSO that didn't have the operational fortitude to really support them on the day-to-day. So they gave up, a huge chunk of their practice, of their EBITDA in exchange for what?
Right.
If they didn't get the administrative help, that was a very, very expensive decision without a return on investment. And conversely to that, we've seen doctors that partner with a DSO that is really, really involved from an administrative, daily operational perspective, and their inclination was really economic. They wanted somebody to give them a big chunk of money. They wanted to invest in stock in the DSO and be more diversified in a bigger company and hit a liquidity event. But from the day-to-day, they really just wanted the DSO to leave them alone from a clinical and operational perspective. Well, they partnered with a big DSO that's super involved in their practice on the day-to-day, and they're miserable because they've given up their autonomy in exchange for, economics. And that was not really their driving goal.
I think it's a really important point to point out as someone who is a dentist and has two practices. It's such a significant relationship that you have with your dental practice. And then, just to kind of clarify things that may seem super simplistic to you, Brandon, but for my audience, I want them to start to understand the ABCs of this world. DSOs are requiring you to stay on and work after the sale, right? You're not selling and Ubering off into the sunset and leaving everybody behind. Most of the time, how long is someone staying and working in their practice after selling to a DSO? What would you give most often range for that?
You're looking at a 3 to 5 year post-closing commitment. So again, who you choose as a partner is critically important because, like you said, you're not selling and sailing off into the sunset. You're going to be there long-term post-closing. Now, it used to be 2 to 3 year commitment, but it's moved more towards a normalization of a 5-year commitment. The difference is that 2 to 3 year commitment that they previously required, you had to produce a certain amount, you had to work a certain number of days, monthly or yearly chairside. In today's environment, DSOs want you to stay on for longer, but they're more flexible in regard to your chairside schedule. You actually, with most DSOs, don't have to work chairside at all, so long as you backfill your production with an associate. So they don't really care who's doing the dentistry. They just want you to have a vested interest in your business long-term post-closing. So you got to make sure you partner with the right people so that you're happy, your staff's happy, and your patients are happy post-affiliation.
Really important. Before we go to number 3, we founded Dentist Job Connect. I believe I'm solving one of the biggest problems in dentistry, bonding dentists together. You cannot help patients chew and smile with confidence without a job. You can't take any time off from your office without an associate. So tell us, we help DSOs, we help group practices, we help solo practices. I haven't had a chance to ask you this question. How do DSOs view the practice owner having an associate? If we just start to talk about Dr. Guac has a $2.4 million practice. He has an associate working 3 days a week, collecting $600,000 a year. Does that make that practice more attractive, less attractive, the same attractive?
Apples to apples, DSOs would always prefer there's multiple providers.
Gotcha.
Key man risk is a big talking point, and the bifurcation of that key man risk among multiple providers is key to long-term sustainability because founder turnover, associate turnover is the Achilles heel of most DSOs. So in an ideal world, they would prefer that there's multiple doctors. Now, that said, we sell a lot of one doctor practices to DSOs, but you will typically trade for a higher valuation, a higher multiple if you have multiple providers.
Awesome. So that's just sort of highlighting that. I mean, and just in looked at it from a simplistic way, using everyone's fantasy football team yesterday, if your quarterback could not play and there was no other quarterback, you're going to have a tough time in fantasy football. And that's even a tougher time in dentistry, Brandon, when there's no other licensed provider on site that can help. And I just think that's, we're going to talk about a variety of things, whether it's selling to a DSO now, selling to a DSO later, preparing to grow and sell a group practice, being able, basically, this is probably a fairly simplistic point, but I like to make it, you have to be able to get along with other dentists if you get into the DSO space. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. All DSOs aspire to have at least 2 providers at every office. So even if you're a 1-doctor practice at the time you affiliate with the DSO, you need to be prepared that they're going to likely want to go multi-specialty and bring specialists into the practice, and they're going to want to bring in at least 1, if not more, associates at some point in time. So the proven ability to play nice with others is definitely a selling point.
Awesome. We're going to go to number 3. I love this one. You made a great checklist here. Not asking the right questions. What does that mean? Number 3 mistake, not asking the right questions. I own 2 practices. They do $2.5 million a year, want to start thinking about DSOs. What are some of the right questions to be asking?
Well, there's a million questions that you need to ask if you're going to navigate this process. DSOs do a ton of due diligence on the owners and the practices that they buy, but we believe diligence should be a 2-way street. And if you've never done this before, you don't know how to navigate diligence from the seller's perspective. So we give our clients a list of about 25 questions to ask in their initial interaction with each DSO buyer that they're going to meet. And that revolves around, who's your private equity partner? Do they have other investments in the dental world? If so, how have they performed? Do they have other investments in medical? Has the company hit a recapitalization event before? If so, when, and what was the return on capital?
I know this is like when dentists use dental terms a lot. And I know, so you guys might, get a temporary tattoo recapitalization. So just pause for a minute and catch us up. Just like when the dentist confuses you as the patient when they use dentist speak. So you've used it a few times. I believe I have a sound understanding of it, but what does a recapitalization event mean? Explain it to us like we're 6-year-olds.
Yeah, a recapitalization event essentially means when the financial sponsor, let's say the private equity firm or family office that owns that particular DSO, sells it to the next investor. And it really happens behind the veil. The brand of the DSO is going to remain the same. All the contracts with all the doctors are going to remain enforceable. All the leases remain enforceable. Really just the financial sponsor switches places. And at that point, when that private equity firm sells the DSO to the next investor, that recapitalization event is typically a liquidity event where the private equity firm, the management team of the DSO, and the doctors that hold equity, whether at the practice level or at the parent company level, have the opportunity to liquidate that equity in part or in full, hopefully at a handsome return comparative to what they initially invested. So a recapitalization event is a liquidity event for all the investors, hopefully at a healthy financial return. And that return could be as high as 3 to 5 times your investment.
Is that the second bite of the apple, as people have talked about, or is that not the second bite? That is the second.
That's the second bite of the apple. And, if you partner with a younger DSO that's rapidly growing, there is the opportunity for not only a second, but a third or fourth bite of the apple.
They need to change all that. Apples are too boring. You need the bigger plate of nachos. That would get people excited. I take one bite of it. Oh, wow, this is so great. I can't wait to get another bite. So I think they really need to reframe that food analogy into something more exciting in the DSO space. So I vote for a bigger plate of nachos as that.
I definitely prefer nachos over apples.
Anything else because I asked you to pause and to clarify, and the not asking questions, anything else you want to add? About not asking the right questions? Anything else you want to add?
A lot of the questions are also surrounding autonomy, right? What are you going to change about my practice post affiliation? Are you going to change the brand? Are you going to change the hours? Are you going to change staff compensation? What do the benefits look like pre-affiliation compared to post-affiliation? Are you going to change my practice management software? I think that's what most doctors are most concerned about is, how are you going to impact my clinical autonomy? How are you going to impact my operational autonomy? what is life going to look like on the day-to-day post-affiliation? So I'd say we bifurcate the questions into, there's a lot of like financial questions about the financial sponsor, recap, deal structure, things of that nature. But then there's a lot of questions about who is this DSO? What is life going to look like post-affiliation from an autonomy perspective? And then if a big part of your why is, hey, I want to offload that administrative burden, how are you going to support me on the day-to-day? Are you going to drop somebody in my office? You know, what departments do you have at your corporate headquarters? Can you take on HR? Can you take on benefits administration? Can you take on accounting and bookkeeping? Can you take on marketing? How much are you actually going to lift off my plate on a day-to-day basis? Those questions have to be asked.
Maybe you can share your thoughts on this, but early on in this space, when I was a broker, my good friend Rob Montgomery, podcast partner, dental focus attorney, was talking about this. It was like 2017. And I think a lot of dentists are worried that the DSO is going to come in and tell them to do too much, change things. He said, really, you have to be more concerned about them doing too little, more concerned about them sort of saying, you know, you sold to us, now keep figuring out. Because as a dentist, man, I'm assuming you're still in the practice, you're still the leader of that practice, and you still have to make leadership decisions, regardless of whose name or who's officially the owner. So I think that's a really good point, because it seems like it would be the worst case scenario to want to give up some responsibilities only to find out you still have those responsibilities. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I think that's 100% accurate. A lot of doctors fear that the DSO is going to have a really heavy hand, but in reality, you know, most of them are pretty hands-off. So you need to communicate what you're looking for during the marketing process as you're interacting with buyers, so that they can decide and you can decide, are they the right fit for your why? In reality, the DSOs that buy practices typically change very little. You know, the Aspens of the world, the Pacifics of the world that start practices from scratch, you know, they kind of have a culture. You've got to drink the Kool-Aid if you're going to work in that environment. The DSOs that acquire practices, they try to partner with good doctors and good businesses and not screw them up. And the easiest way to screw them up is to enact a tremendous amount of change upon that business post-affiliation. So yeah, I think there's a higher probability or higher risk that they, you know, do very little rather than do too much.
I like that. We're going to get to number 4 in a minute, but I want to pause and share that I'm talking with Brandon Moncrief, CEO of McLaren & Associates, awesome key resource and sponsor on What's the Deal with DSOs, mistakes dentists make. If you would like to connect with us and Brandon, just text CELL to 215-543-6454 or email CELL to transitions@dentalnachos.com. But now let's talk about money for a second and walk me through a most likely scenario, okay? Someone has a $1.5 million practice as a solo dentist. They could go and sell it to a private practice dentist, which still totally exists, and they could work there for maybe 6 months and then ride off into the sunset. And let's just say, for the sake of this argument, they're going to get $1.35 million, right? That's what they're going to get for that transition. Something that's a tale as old as transition time, right? Where you can sell your solo practice, get a check, stay for 6 months in this scenario, and then see you, no more responsibilities, right? Where is the money upside to the DSO world? Part of my job is to show the true landscape of what's happening without judgment, right? So tell us that scenario in the DSO world and how the seller could have a better financial upside partnering with the DSO.
Sure. So the example that you used, that 1.5 million in revenue, I mean, that's really the inflection point where the DSO valuation starts to run away from the private buyer valuation, because at 1.5 million in revenue, if you're running a profitable practice, that's where you start to generate meaningful EBITDA. So EBITDA is essentially absentee owner profit. Think of it, you know, revenue minus overhead, including what you would have to pay a doctor to do the dentistry. The money that's left over is EBITDA. So in your example, 1.5 million in revenue, healthy EBITDA margin would be about 20%. So EBITDA is about 300,000. You said in a private buyer world, that practice might sell for anywhere from 1.2 to 1.35 million. In the DSO world, if EBITDA is around 300,000, it could sell for anywhere 2 million to 2.5 million. So premium valuation, right? Your cash at close in that scenario is going to be 60 to 80%.
So let's pause for that, because I think some dentists, I spent a lot of time explaining that. So let's say they say this is worth $2.2 million. you're not getting $2.2 million at close. You said 60 to 80%. So if we do use, 70% of that as you are getting at close more than what you would have gotten from the private buyer. You're getting 1.4 or 1.5 million. So it closes, but now you keep walking us through what happens to the rest of that 2.2 million.
Yeah, so let's say you take 1.5 million cash at close, valuation was 2.2 million. So you've got 700,000 of the purchase price. That's either going to be retained equity, joint venture equity in your own office within your own four walls. And you're going to see pro rata EBITDA distributions associated with that equity post-close. So let's say you have 30% retained equity, joint venture equity in your own office. You're going to get 30% of the ongoing EBITDA on a go forward, and then have the opportunity to liquidate that joint venture equity in part or in full at a recapitalization event, hopefully at a handsome return. If your practice trades for 7 times EBITDA, the DSO in a healthy market should trade for anywhere between 12 to 15 times EBITDA. So in that joint venture model, when you hit that recap and you sell down that joint venture equity, you're essentially doubling your money, right? You sold for 7 times EBITDA, the DSO trades for 14 times EBITDA. Assuming your EBITDA remained flat, you essentially doubled your money. If your EBITDA continued to go up in the years leading up to the recap, you got an exponentially higher return at that liquidity event. The other scenario is that 30%, rather than it being retained equity in your own practice, you actually buy stock in the DSO. So you own stock in the parent company. Now, in that scenario, we call that a holding company model. You're not going to see ongoing EBITDA distributions because you no longer own equity at the practice level. So in a holding company model, you're investing in the stock of the DSO's holding company, and you have the opportunity to liquidate that equity in full, typically at a recapitalization event, hopefully at a handsome return, could be anywhere from 2 to a 5x return in a healthy market.
And that's why this financial upside, you do take your chips off the table, to use a nacho term, some of your financial chips off the table. And I can understand why a 58-year-old might want to get $1.5 million and have this opportunity to make a lot more with the responsibility of continuing to work in their own dental practice, not as the majority owner anymore. I think, I'm sure you do just as much counseling of dentists as you do talking about cash flow, because it's probably counseling plus cash flow, because it's an understanding that you are going to be working with someone looking over your shoulder. And a lot of times people want someone looking over their shoulder. They say, look over as much as you can, help me with my team, get me equipment, do other things. So I really appreciate you breaking down that example here. Before we move on to that other mistake, how about doctors that sold early, or 2 doctors that kind of have the same exact practice, same evaluation, but the timing of their sale? Tell us about that.
Yeah, well, I think you always have to look at your runway, right? Like what is your why? What's your motivating factor? Economic, trying to offload the administrative burden, and then what's your runway to exiting the practice? I mean, if you're 58 years old and you're planning to retire by the time you're 63, and you're on a 5-year window before exiting dentistry, it becomes pretty compelling to look at the DSO option. You're going to get to de-risk, take that lump sum off the table, higher valuation, higher cash at close than you would for a private buyer. You're going to get some administrative help. And then you've got the arbitrage opportunity through the equity component and partnering with a larger entity. But if you're, 42 and you've got another 20 years before you exit, the runway conversation becomes critically important. There's got to be typically some other compelling factor, in that why conversation other than economics. And often that is, hey, I'm just super stressed out with running the business and I need help. Or, I moved here from some other place. I started a practice. I've done really well, but me and my wife eventually want to move back to wherever we originally came from. So, people are more transient than ever. They move around more than ever. We've got a lot of younger doctors that, are planning to exit their practice on a 5 to 7 year window and relocate, or pivot into a different career, or exit that particular practice and do it all over again and, build it up and sell it again to a DSO. There's a lot more entrepreneurial dentists out there than there were in the previous generation. So there's a lot of different reasons why people look at this, but as your runway gets longer, as your time frame gets longer, the conversation can get less and less compelling if it's purely an economic conversation.
Yeah, I totally appreciate you clarifying that. Number 4, you have, and I like this one, failure to obtain proper representation. So in the mistakes, the 5 mistakes dentists make, we've talked throughout: responding to unsolicited offers, failure to create optionality, number 1, selling to the wrong DSO, number 2, not asking the right questions, number 3, and now we're at failure to obtain proper representation. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so we talked about that a little bit earlier. That's failure to build the right team, right? You need a sell-side advisor, you need an attorney, you need an accountant, you need a financial advisor. You need all your team, experienced people that know how to navigate this world to make sure that you, one, make a good decision as to if and when you're going to go down the road of pursuing a DSO affiliation. And then 2, make sure that you maximize your optionality and maximize your financial income. When you call a DSO, you get treated differently than if I call a DSO, right? As a dentist, you're good for one deal. As a sell-side advisor, as a broker, I'm good for hundreds of deals. They're going to treat you differently if you come to the table with me, as opposed to you come unrepresented. And look, they're opportunistic. And if I was in their shoes, I'd do the same thing. I mean, the goal at the end of the day, if you're backed by private equity, is to buy low and sell high. Right. And the way you buy low is to find doctors, proprietary leads that come through your marketing channels or through doctor referrals that don't have somebody like me at the table. They control the narrative regarding EBITDA. They control the narrative regarding valuation, and ultimately, buy your practice at a discount. And it's a cost average game for them. Let's say they're going to buy 10 practices. Okay. They're going to buy 7 of them, 8 of them direct without the doctor having proper representation. And they're probably going to save a turn of EBITDA on those practices.
Gotcha.
So they buy those practices for 6 times EBITDA rather than 7 or 7.5 times EBITDA. Well, that means that the remaining 2 out of 10 that they're going to buy through our company, they can pay 7, 8 times EBITDA, because when they cost average it all together, it barely moved the needle from a cost average perspective. So because DSOs are buying so many practices at a discount directly from doctors, they can afford to pay a premium for the practices that we're selling.
Really key points. Really, you explain that really, really well. And I think also representation is more than just who protects you financially, also who protects you as a person. And people get to know you as people. And I'm sure as you do these deals, knowing people who's maybe knowing attorneys that someone's worked with for 20 years, I find an accountant that they just met, it really is this team effort to get the dentist and oftentimes their spouse to not mess up basically the biggest decision of their dental career after buying that practice. I like this one, and falling for a gimmick. Number 5, you have falling for a gimmick. This dentist will love. So what is falling for a gimmick in the DSO world?
Well, there's 2 main gimmicks that we've seen out there recently. And one of them is buy-side advisors. So there are people kind of masquerading as sell-side advisors or brokers that are cold calling dentists and saying, hey, doc, I can help hook you up with multiple DSOs if you want to go down that road, and you don't have to pay me a thing. The DSOs will pay me for me to represent you. And the reality is that whoever pays you is who you represent, right? The DSOs are paying those individuals that have influence and have relationship with doctors to bring them deals, typically proprietary deals without competition, because they know that if that person bird dogs a deal and brings it to them off market, they're going to save money. They're going to get a discount on that practice. So they're willing to compensate that person to bring them a deal because they know they're going to get a discount on the practice by it being off market. The other big one that we're seeing right now, so that's buy-side advisors. Just be careful about buy-side advisors. They don't represent you. If the DSO is paying their fee, that's who they represent. The other one is the roll-up gimmick. There's a lot of people out there today pitching this concept that, hey, join my co-op. I'm going to put together 10, 20, 50, 100 practices. And doc, on your own, you're worth 5 to 6 times EBITDA. But by joining our co-op, we're all going to sell simultaneously to the same private equity firm or DSO, and we're going to get this huge premium. We're going to sell for 10, 12 times EBITDA just by duct taping together a bunch of unaffiliated practices. And the reality is it doesn't work. You're not going to get a premium by duct taping together a bunch of unaffiliated offices. And it's going to severely limit your optionality. Everybody's got a different why. Everybody is at a different place in their career. Everybody has a different runway. Thinking that you and 20 of your colleagues all have the same why and therefore should all sell to the same DSO to get a sliver of a premium on valuation is a bad idea, because the initial valuation, even though it's really not going to move the needle going along with the roll-up concept, I would argue the initial valuation is less important than the deal structure and who you sell to.
Yeah.
So I hate the roll-up concept. It doesn't work. The dumb money left the marketplace when interest rates skyrocketed and capital markets tightened up. It's a losing proposition. So don't fall for that. And the other thing is, I mean, the fees are atrocious typically. You've got to pay the fee to join the co-op. You've got to pay ongoing administrative fees. You've got to pay this huge broker, transaction fee at the point a deal, actually happens. So it's a lose-lose in my opinion. It limits optionality. You're not really going to see an economic benefit from it. Stay away from it. That's my advice.
Well, you've given us great advice. I want to do a little bonus speed round with you. People who are watching it, if they want to ask some questions, they can. This will be available for you to watch on demand instead of your favorite streaming channel. Brandon and Paul Goodman, much funnier than anything else they have coming out on Amazon Prime. But Brandon, a couple speed round questions. Current market conditions. How are rising interest rates and capital constraints impacting the DSO marketplace?
The market's changed fairly significantly over the past year. I mean, most private equity firms are on short-term, lines of credit. Most of them are floating. So, interest rates have doubled and it is squeezing cash flow to some degree. The capital markets have tightened up considerably. Banks are not extending leverage. They're not extending debt at near the multiples they were a year or two ago. So as a result, you've got quite a few DSOs that don't have capital right now, that are not growing or not buying practices or are being very conservative from a valuation perspective. Conversely, you've got a lot of younger DSOs that have taken on PE money here recently over the past few years that have plenty of capital and continue to be aggressive in pursuing acquisitions. So there's been kind of a reshuffling of the deck, and it's our job to constantly stay in touch with these DSOs and understand who has money, who doesn't, who's being aggressive, who's not, and make sure that we make the process as predictable as possible. The last thing you want to do is ink an LOI with a DSO that actually doesn't have the capital to close that deal. And there are DSOs out there bidding on practices today that don't have money. So staying on top of who's hot and who's not at the moment, I think is critically important, and who's positioned for long-term success, right? Who can weather the current storm? Who has the cash flow? Who has the capital? Who has the operational fortitude, the managerial pedigree to actually operate a business at scale and not fall on their face in what is currently a difficult climate for DSOs to navigate?
Awesome. I love that one. Now, I don't know, you probably are not going to go back to dental school, Brandon, but so if I just catch you up in this 30 seconds, I went to dental school and I wanted to help people. And frequently patients walk into my operatory and tell me how much they hate me without me asking. They could have kept it in their head. Just want to let you know, I hate the dentist. I say, I want to let you know you could have kept that in your head. But banks love the dentist. And you're also saying, why does private equity love the dental industry and dentists? And maybe this comes with a double-edged sword, but I'm at least trying to be positive for my dental people. Why does private equity love us dentists so much?
Well, they love any industry that's fragmented, right, and can benefit from economies of scale. They love the fact that dentists as a whole are not super astute from a business perspective, and private equity feels like they can build out that administrative function and help dentists run their business in a more efficient way, in a more profitable way. So they love industries where they can come in, they can consolidate the industry relatively quickly, they can leverage economies of scale, right? They can buy equipment and supplies for half of what you pay for it as a private practitioner. They can leverage, the evil, PPOs, the payers for better reimbursement rates. They can throw their weight around, throw their size around, and in doing so, increase the efficiencies And then dentistry was already hot from a private equity perspective going into COVID. Dentistry rebounded as fast or faster than any other industry, certainly any other medical vertical coming out of COVID. At that point in time, private equity that wasn't in dental decided that they needed to be in dental, and those that were doubled down. So that's why you see consolidation pick up pace, coming out of the shutdown.
Love that answer. It made me feel good and also a little awkward on the inside because it sounded like they love us because we don't know what to do with business. But I'll choose to think about us having good opportunity for growth. It's a double-edged. I knew that answer would be a double-edged sword, but it's important to realize both of those things. Not only do dentists have an amazing opportunity to help people and be profitable, they also have a vulnerability in not really understanding their own business and how it runs. So hopefully by us doing these things, there is some new practice owner who's caring just as much about business now as their crown preps, because you have to care about both. I'm sure you see many dentists who've had long careers, delivered great dentistry, but not thrived as a business person. And it's probably actually fairly poignant and sad to see. So hopefully this is inspiring people to do that. My last question I'm going to ask is, what types of practices are DSOs looking to buy? I think this is very valuable because practice owners come in all shapes and sizes. You could have a $600,000 a year practice with 50% overhead, making 300 grand a year. But if you're running out of 3 ops, Brandon, my assumption is that's usually not one that's attractive to a DSO. So just kind of tell us what types of practices, whether it's physical size as well as revenue size.
Yeah, so typically, in an ideal world, 1.5 million revenue or higher with 1 or more doctors within 60 miles of a metro area. And that 1.5 million is kind of the magic mark because that's where you start to generate meaningful EBITDA. I mean, DSOs will chase practices, with revenue of $1 million plus, but I would say economically, from the seller's standpoint, it doesn't really become compelling until you hit around 1.5 million in revenue, because that's where the DSO valuation starts to really run away from the private buyer valuation. That's where you start to earn a significant premium compared to what private buyers will pay. And as that revenue ratchets up, as you get to 2 million, 3 million, 5 million in revenue, I mean, those practices are selling for 3 to 4 times what a private buyer will pay for those offices. So 1.5 million in revenue or higher really is kind of the magic mark, although we work with clients, all the way down to about $1 million in revenue. 1, ideally 2+ providers within 60 miles of a major metro area, and at least 5 or more operatories, because DSOs aspire to eventually have at least 2 or more providers working out of each location. So as a general rule, that's what they're looking for. And it spans the full gamut of dentistry. I mean, we're talking general dentistry, ortho, OMS, perio, implant focus, cosmetic focus. There's really a lid for every pot these days. There's DSOs in all of those lanes at the moment. So regardless of your specialty or the type of practice you have, if you've got the size and you're willing to stick around for a while, DSOs are going to be interested.
Awesome. You've delivered so much awesome value here. I do like to share adding an associate to your practice helps you in the DSO space. So people can reach out to us at Dentist Job Connect to help them with that. We're bonding dentists together daily. If you're thinking about selling your dental practice and want to get responsible information from our sponsor, Brandon Moncrief of McLaren and Associates, you can text sell to 215-543-6454, or you can email sell to transitions@dentalnachos.com. Email sell to transitions@dentalnachos.com. And then in our last kind of 120 seconds, 2-minute drill, someone reaches out to you, we connect them to you. What does the start to working with you guys look like? Do you just email every tax return since the last 20 years to you? Do you fill out a form? Do you have a conversation with you? My whole goal, Brandon, is to help dentists make the best decisions for them. And that might be a private practice sale, that might be a DSO sale, but more information and education helps. So tell us, what does it look like to start to work with you?
Yeah, initially we just start with a discovery call, right? We get to know each other. I want to understand your why. I want to know a little bit about the economics of your practice and really see if it makes sense to dig in and do evaluation, do an EBITDA analysis. Let's figure out what would your practice be worth from a private buyer versus a DSO perspective, and then lay out all the options economically from a deal structure perspective. and really just educate you about what this ecosystem looks like, what your options are. And then from there, we decide. That's a standalone engagement. And then from there, we decide, does it make sense to go to the open market?
I'm sure, what I think is cool is, no one's more fit than me as a just turned 46-year-old, but maybe you say, hey, you got to go work out more. You got to work on this. Maybe I'm assuming that you say, hey, it would make more sense if your profit was higher. It would make more sense if you had an associate. So I think it's so key. You can never get good information too early in life, even if it's not the time to act on it. And my whole goal in doing what we're doing now is to get dentists to avoid these mistakes, because I'm sure you see some sad stories. Do you see dentists that you just say, oh, I wish they reached out to me sooner, they wouldn't be in this spot?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think all too often the mistake that dentists make when it comes to the DSO game is they call the DSO and have them educate them on what the marketplace looks like and what's a good deal structure and what's a good DSO. Well, ultimately what kind of advice you're going to get. It's very biased. And
that's kind of like, how old's your daughter, Brandon?
I have a 7 and 3-year-old.
Yeah, I have 9 and 5. It's kind of like going to my 5-year-old being like, tell me how much candy you think I should be able to eat all the time, candy all the time. And we walk in and say, she's not allowed to do that. So I think that's a great kind of analogy to wrap up on. Stick around for a minute. Del Nacho's Facebook Live crew to reach out to us to learn. You can connect with Brandon Moncrief, our awesome sponsor. Text cell to 215-543-6454. Thanks so much, Brandon.
Thanks, Paul. Good to see you.